Hi guys, Matt Rowe here with another Zwift Power Up Cycling podcast, here with Kev Poulton. How are you, Kev?
Yeah, good, thanks, Matt. Yeah, back in Australia for a few days and ready to get into another podcast.
Good man. Well, I spent last weekend doing the Zipp high-speed desert challenge on Zwift, which is pretty cool. But you were riding around California, weren't you, with the Zwift lot?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to have a trip down the coast of California from San Francisco down to Los Angeles with the Zwift crew over 3 days. And yeah, there was some long riding, but some very nice riding as well.
Brilliant. So today is something a little bit new. Yeah, this is the first of 2 podcasts where we focus on one topic. So that topic is marginal gains. I guess it's those little ways to power us up, and I guess it's quite fitting for the Zwift Power Up Cycling podcast, as that's what we're talking about. And the reason this is 2-part is because of such a fascinating chat with our guest, which kind of went on longer than we planned, and we just didn't want to cut any of it out. So our guest is Joshua Poertner, and he's one of a very small circle of marginal gain fanatics in the world whose passion for the sport and those kind of techie gains is, yeah, it's just clear. So here is part 1 of my chat with Josh. All right, well, Josh, thank you for joining the podcast. Just, I guess, go through a little bit about your background. I mean, you own Silca at the minute, and that's the bike pumps and tools. I guess it's the stuff you see someone lay on the table in the calf, and you're like, I just have to pick that up and have a look at it.
Yeah, that is the goal. That is the goal, that we strive to make beautiful products that surprise and delight our customers. And the vision with Silca was really to kind of bring an old world craftsmanship and a new technology together into categories that, quite frankly, have kind of become commoditized and kind of crappy, right? I think pumps and tools and a lot of these things have kind of just really gone to, in the case of pumps, quite literally gone to 2 Chinese manufacturers, make all of them, right? No matter what the brand. I mean, they come from the same 2 factories. And, I think we wanted something better for ourselves and kind of believe that there were going to be other people out there like us who were more particular and who wanted something better.
Yeah.
And so that was really the vision to buy the brand and start it over. It's a beautiful 100-year-old brand, 1917, started in Milan. And the owner was the grandson of the founder, was a dear friend of mine, and he had cancer 2012 into 2013, and the company just spiraled. And so when I got there, he was dying, and the Italian government was taking it into a receivership, like a bankruptcy type. And we were able to get the brand out, fortunately, right, and save it, because it just seemed too cool of a brand to let it go.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, we have a lot of fun.
I bet. And previous to Silca, you were at Zipp. You were the technical director?
Yeah, so 15 years at Zipp. We had a lot of fun there as well. We kind of a similar story. Zipp was founded originally in '89. Did the first beam bike, the first 3-spoke, the first full carbon disc. I mean, really innovative company. It was actually founded by an ex-Formula One engineer from Williams, who'd come to the States to work in IndyCar. And really got itself into some trouble. 97, 98, had developed the first carbon crankset and the first carbon mountain bike wheels and the first carbon mountain bike crankset just in time for the mountain bike boom to bust. So for those of you who weren't there, mountain bike just exploded in the mid-90s, early mid-90s, and suddenly around 1997, 98, it just stopped. And I think something, like a third of the small companies in the mountain bike space went out of business. And so, some serious headwinds, and the F1 guy who owns Zipp at the time, wasn't a cyclist, really wasn't his thing. And he, was, I think, ready to close it down. And so he sold it to a guy named Andy Ording. And I was working I spent a couple years racing in Europe, then came back to the States to go to college, got an engineering degree, and had ended up in car racing, working on Le Mans prototypes, LMP1 race cars, and was doing that when Andy went to move the company next door to the building I was working. And I was using their car park, and I met him in the parking lot one day, and it was his kismet, as they say.
Good stuff. And what have you got any key accomplishments or projects at Zipp that you're particularly proud of?
Oh gosh, we had such a
all of
good
them.
run, no, not all of them, not all of them, but no, we had a great run, right? We made the first full toroidal rim, which is the shape that everybody pretty much is using today. That was actually an old patent co-owned by Zipp and Head, and the reality was that neither company really just had the manufacturing chops to make it, right? I mean, there's no flat surfaces on this rim, and so it had just sat there unused for years. And with the 808, we did, the first kind of super deep wheel with this toroidal shape, dimples. That's my patent on that shape. And with that project, we went from, it was really the first 28 millimeter wide rim as well. And so, I remember it seemed like a crazy product, and then Tour Magazine in Germany did a big wind tunnel test, and they found it was essentially about as fast as a disc wheel of the era, and it just completely changed the business for us in Europe. Right at the same time, we got with Team CSC. I mean, it took 2 years of trying to convince European team directors that aero was a thing, that it worked and was real, and Bjarne Riis was the first guy to take us up on it. And I think that the real kind of transition there was that the power meters came about, and now that we had power meters, you could create the data, right? I mean, it wasn't just a theoretical. We could actually take the riders out and do testing, and you could see it, that it was working. So yeah, we ended up with the first team to ride carbon wheels every day, which was a huge coup. You look at from the 2 years after we started that, I mean, you went from not a single carbon wheel to only carbon wheels. We developed the first deep section wheel with handling properties, right? That all of the steering torque, kind of all the stuff that we talk about now in terms of the handling of wheels, we developed all of that at Zipp. We were the first to quantify it. We were the first to give it names. So we were and then I think the big one that probably most well known for is developed the first carbon wheel to survive at Roubaix. And so that was a 5-year project with a 7-year vision that everybody said it couldn't be done. I got my head handed to me a couple of times. I actually was, Zipp and me personally were on the Velo News. They used to do like the thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah,
we were personally thumbs down when Magnus Bäckstedt broke both his wheels. And, we were called all sorts of names. And we really failed bad a couple times. And then as soon as we did it, it was a light switch. I mean, Cancellara winning in 2010 in the post-race interview said, this race will never again be won on the old wheels. And it was funny that Velo News later then ascribed to me that I was the guy that had killed the Ambrosio Nemesis rim. And so that's sort of a long-running joke. I responded to them and said, I did not kill it, though I may or may not have driven the getaway car. Right.
Played your role somewhere.
Yeah, but no, so we had so many just great successes. We had a lot of failures in there as well that, you don't remember those as much, right? It's the time kind of smooths those over.
Yeah, sure. But obviously you have to fail. You alluded to it that just then. You have to fail to succeed. And the amount of, just numerically, for every project that becomes a success, like carbon wheels, there must be tenfold the amount of projects that fail, right?
Yes and no. I mean, I think there are absolutely projects that are total failures, total write-offs, right? We're going to make this thing, and a year and a half in, you just scrap it. Mm-hmm. Those are pretty rare, but they absolutely happen. I would say the bigger one from our experience is you have an idea, you think you're going to execute it in a certain way, you get a third into it and realize you're completely wrong about half of it, right? You realize that the math doesn't match the data. And of course, I think I've been fortunate enough to have great mentors in my career that, when the math and the data don't match, you have to learn to see that as an opportunity, right? That's not the loss, right? That's not the failure. And I think so many companies, especially small companies, right? That's where you get stuck, or you run out of money, or maybe you've hung your hat on this belief that this theory was the theory, and then suddenly the math and the data don't match, and you're stuck. And I've been fortunate to have this great, we call it the Secret Squirrel Society. It's about a dozen really insane engineers. I mean, guys who've written textbooks, guys. I mean, I've been so lucky. Guys from aerospace, guys from car racing, and girls too. And just being able to go outside the industry, outside the space, and take a different viewpoint. Because the thing that I think I really had to learn, but now it's one of the most exciting feelings that I can think of in what I do is, you realize, okay, here's the theory, here's the math, we create the data, and all of a sudden there's this anomaly, and you look at that anomaly and go, wow, that's the opportunity, right? That's, if everybody thinks it works like X and then suddenly it works like Y, that's nobody knows what that is, right? That's an opportunity to find something that nobody's quantified before. And that's, I think a best example there is rolling resistance, right? We all believed forever that rolling resistance was all about casing losses in the tires, right? It's, you pump the tires harder so that the casing deflects less and the rolling resistance goes down. And you put a wheel on a drum and you get this beautiful curve, and it repeats time after time. And then as soon as we had really good tools, pitot tubes to give us air properties, and these really high-end GPS, high-frequency GPS and high-frequency power meters, and you can do this testing, you realize that it doesn't look like a ski slope. It looks like a ski jump, right? It kicks up at the higher pressures. And, we discovered that 10 plus years ago now, and really had a moment of what the hell is that? It completely blows the math apart. And of course, in there was all this opportunity. And we've since, if you've listened to my podcast or read any of our blog posts, we call this the break point, where it goes from going down with pressure to going up with pressure. And we call the effects on the right side of the curve impedance effects, which I stole from electrical engineering. But it's a fitting word in my brain for what's happening, that you're going from the losses being primarily in the casing of the tire, which is a pretty efficient thing, to the tire becoming so rigid that you're shaking the rider on top of the bike. And you have all these losses associated with the vibration of a human, which is not a very efficient thing to shake, as well as all of the friction and the other issues at the contact points with the bike, right? The saddle, the tape, your feet. And so it's like you're trading a highly efficient thing for a highly inefficient thing. And, and once we knew that, we could do magic with it.
Yeah.
we started, applying that around 08, 09, and you can just list, I think we've worked with almost every time trial world champion, Olympic gold medalist, probably 2/3 of the tour winners, the TT. I mean, it changed the game, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm probably 3 to 4 weeks every spring in the run up to Flanders and Roubaix, working with, a handful of teams that I've worked with for years now, really trying to optimize and refine pressure and tire size for course and weight and surface. And, as the tire technology changes, the pressure changes and so on. So it's lots of modeling, lots of just kind of being in the trenches, but it really changed the game.
Yeah, because then even going back, go back 10 years, and 22, 23 mil tires were kind of the go-to for the general public. But now, for sure, it's 25, and you got tubeless, maybe 28. You buy a bike off the shelf, chances are it's got 25 or 28 mil tires now. So yeah, that's going back 10 years ago, we're saying the pros were a lot of the pro peloton, and you guys at Zipp, you were already had that knowledge, and given World Tour teams or the pro teams in Roubaix and the like, they were already using those wider tires back then, or was this much more of a kind of the last 5 years or so? What kind of period are we talking?
It really probably started around 07, 08, and it started with Roubaix and the Roubaix project. We had this struggle where the pros were all racing on 21s and some of them 23s, and we saw that early with that 21-23 change, and that first 808 that we did in 04 was the result of, I was at the wind tunnel with Lance Armstrong in 2001, like would have been winter 01 for the 02 season. And, it's funny that they're testing in the wind tunnel on, time trial wheels with these, beautiful 19, 20 millimeter time trial tires. And Johan Bruneel is telling me like, I only am allowing them this year to ride the 23s because we've just had so many flats with the 20s. And that felt in the moment like such an opportunity of, well, you put the 23 on that wheel and the wheel stinks. So if we're going to make that move, we need to make wheels that work there. And then once we did it and realized you can make a wheel every bit as aero with the wider tire, you just have to design it properly. But then understanding the wider tires rolled a little bit better, a little lower coefficient of rolling resistance. The riders liked the way they handled better, and you had just a bit more safety to the rim, right? As a tire gets wider, it gets taller. So, from a 20 to a 23 is 3 millimeters of width, but you also get almost 3 millimeters of height. So from the point of view of pinch flatting, which, you can pinch flat tubulars, it happens in the pro peloton with some frequency. So from the pinch flat perspective, and, I think more importantly, the rim breakage perspective, that was a huge step forward. And so we saw that as the thing that was going to let us take carbon wheels into the pro peloton, right? That failures could go down, risk would go down. And then also with that 23, you could run, you run a little lower pressure. So the comfort is high. And there was this perception that these deep section wheels were really uncomfortable. And of course, most of them were, because they were V-shaped rims, right? And there's nothing much more rigid than a triangle, so we had a lot of problems to fix. But that was the beginning. In that moment, the directionality for me became pretty clear, right? That if we could keep the aero properties, the wider was going to be the future. And so, we find ourselves in 2008. Stuart O'Grady wins Roubaix with us in 2007 on the old aluminum wheels. We'd been testing with him to try to get him on the carbon wheels at that point, and we just weren't there. But, we found that the conventional wisdom was 24s in the dry, 27s in the rain. And the riders, the mechanics, the directors, they really saw this as being purely related to weather and to grip. And so what we ended up doing was kind of developing, instrumenting a bike and kind of doing all the science around it to try to understand this better, and finding that the wider tire on the cobbles was just faster by a huge amount. And so by 2009, when we're really getting refined, we're able to we would motor pace the riders into the Arenberg forest on a scooter and to try to simulate race speeds. And we would find that every time you lower the pressure, the guys go faster, right? So faster, faster, faster. And then eventually you hit a point and boom, broken wheels.
Yes.
And so, and so, we had this, I always refer to it as the Icarus problem, right? Like, the closer to the sun we could fly, the faster we could go, but you just can't fly too close. And so that was really the beginning, probably the looking back, those were the original seeds for what we're doing at Silca now, right? We were hot rodding gauges and learning that the pumps all had terribly inaccurate gauges on them. And so we were hot rodding pumps and then building special gauges. And of course we kept all this a big secret, because it was, our tire and pressure strategy, the tire pressure alone is worth something like 16 watts on cobbles. That's huge, right? They're huge numbers.
That is huge. But obviously, an event like the Cobble Classics, 80%, 85%, maybe even more is ridden on tarmac. So how do you kind of, it's a bit of a trade-off, isn't it, between flatter tires or less pressure that are better for the cobbles versus the tarmac sections? I mean, how that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a fascinating asymmetry, and we can send some graphs to share with you. But there's a fascinating asymmetry around the breakpoint, and that is that on moderately to higher roughness surfaces, the left side of the curve, the casing losses side, which would be the low, under pressure, the penalty of being under pressure is significantly less than the penalty of being over pressure. And so you can end up in a spot where, being over pressure might be, 10 to 20 watts on the cobbles, but only save you a watt on the tarmac.
Got you.
And so, that plays into the strategy though, right? And, this year was a great example that, we work with quite a few of the teams, and I was there this year embedded with EF. We sell a lot of stuff to a bunch of the teams, and I think something like 7 of the top 10 were using Silca pressure gauges and pressure technology and strategy that we've developed out for them in the past. But I was embedded deep with EF, who's one of my just favorite teams to work with, because Andreas Clear is a old friend, an amazing guy. And, and this year is a good example of, we had strong wind from the north, right? And when you look at the map of the race, the majority of the cobbled sections and really pretty much all the bad ones are north-south. And so when the wind is out of the north, the conventional wisdom has always sort of been that the race is not going to be won on the cobbles, but it's going to be won on the tarmac, when you can break the race apart in sort of the echelons in the east-west section, which is primarily tarmac. And, if you remember back to Cancellara's win in 2010, that's really how that went down as well, right? He was essentially leading them over the cobbles, sort of quite honestly tormenting them. I've got a great slide in a talk that I do that to convince Fabian to ride the wheels, we took him to the tunnel and we actually put him on his bike and then a clone of Bonen's bike, with the old wheels. And between, the aero is something like 40 watts and then the tires and pressures and our strategy. And, we crazy stuff, right? Like we epoxy the tires on instead of tubular glue because that saves 2 watts, right? Deep level stuff.
Yeah.
But when you sum it all up and apply it to, a 30 mile an hour condition, he had a 73, 74 watt advantage.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
And that's trying to get into his head. I remember telling him, like, you were essentially on a time trial bike. And everyone else is on a bike of the Eddie Merckx era, if not worse, right? Because, you look at the Eddie Merckx bike that Bonen was on that year, had a BB96 with a 90 millimeter wide, flat-faced down tube. This bicycle was worse aerodynamically than the bikes of the 70s.
Yeah. But they look cool.
And so,
right?
it
look cool.
Oh, they certainly
The
look.
Belgians love him.
Yeah.
But that's incredible.
But yeah, so so that all comes into play, and so we, this year's a good example. We probably snuck up a couple psi on the pressures, knowing that when it really went down, it was going to go down on the tarmac.
That is absolutely fascinating. The fact that wind direction has an influence on tire pressure and the way the race is going to fan out. I consider myself fairly close to the sport, but that's literally that's a marginal gain there, isn't it? And I think that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? It's this concept of marginal gains, eking out all those tiny percentages. And I don't know what you think, Josh, but for me, different people will credit the application of marginal gains, the theory to cycling. They'll credit it to many different people. But for me, it kind of became mainstream, especially through Dave Brailsford at British Cycling and their approach to the Olympic Games and the start of Team Sky. And it's not just the on-bike and the athletes. This is kind of culture of these organisations. So on-bike, off-bike, the riders, but the staff as well. It's everyone, everywhere. But again, you're talking about CSC. This was before the Dave Brailsford era.
Yeah, well, I think not coincidentally, the technical director at Sky is Karsten Jepsen, who was the technical director at CSC, and there, a lot of I think what we were doing then in that theory has carried forward. Yeah. And Brailsford, I think certainly, most widely credited with the term, really bringing it from it's a economic theory term, right? It's the whole thing is called the aggregation of marginal gains, and I think he was really the one to certainly publicize it, and expose kind of expose the world to some of the things in the back. And then of course, my career has been really about the bike and the rider and the clothing and all the things around that. And he, his vision is so impressive in taking it, like you said, to the mattresses, the sleeping conditions, the washing machines, right?
Yeah.
It's just, they took it so next level, but it's fun for me to look in there and we love and work with that team, and they use a lot of our stuff and are dear friends of ours. So it's fun to look in there and kind of be able to trace some of the lineage back, right? And there's a few of us who were there at the beginning, and it's fun to kind of watch how that's progressed over the years and to think where it's going. Yeah. Because there's so much we still don't know.
It's exciting, isn't it? It is exciting to think
it really
how
is.
far it's come. You just mentioned clothing then, and you look at pictures in the 90s, jerseys would just be kind of around the arms, they'd be baggy and flappy, they'd be flapping around their shoulders, and the kit was just flappy, slow kit. Because now there's this, we all agree that creases and flappy kit is slow. So there's a big focus on tight fitting, more aero materials. And there's a good example, I think, the GB Olympic team during the holding camp for the 2012 Olympics got given this new Olympic kit, the Olympic clothing, and it was dubbed kind of the fastest kit in the world. And it had, within the GB camp, had a kind of a real aura about it. And I remember my wife, she went to London, and she showed me her new overshoes, and they were kind of real high. They kind of come up well up your leg, and they were just so different to what we were all accustomed to. And no, they were told, no, this material is, it's more aero than your skin, so the more you cover up, the better. So long shorts, but I do wonder how much of that is an actual aerodynamic, let's call it a physical benefit versus placebo. What's your take on that?
You've walked into awesome psychological territory. Yeah. I've always said, that the first 10 years of my career, I was solving largely technical problems. And the second 10 years of my career, I've largely been solving psychological problems. Yeah, no, you've nailed it. And the placebo effect is a huge thing because it's real, right? I think that's something that people don't always remember or maybe fully appreciate. Like you do a medicine trial and the placebo always has an effect, like always works. Yeah. In a lot of cases it works nearly as well as the drug or whatever they're trying to do. So we know that's real and powerful, and where you can use it to your advantage, it just makes so much sense. I've often argued that here in America, and I know for sure, and I would assume most places, but it's illegal for a doctor to prescribe a placebo. And there's a part of me that says, well, that seems silly. If we know that it works, and in some cases the placebo might have a 50% success rate and the actual drug might have a 60% success rate, but has side effects. What's wrong with trying the placebo, right? In the marginal gains aspect of our sport, I'm a huge believer in both, right? If you can have both, all the better. And, I think we are a sport rooted in conventional wisdom. And so much of what we're doing when it's different, it's, I would say it's pushing a rock up a hill, right? Sure. It's like the Sisyphean task, right? We push it up the hill and we go to bed and we realize it's at the bottom of the hill again and we have to push it back up. And you see that, for a lot of riders, particularly none of these things, in road cycling especially, none of these things are winning the race for you, right? We're sort of playing at the margins with the percentages, right? We're giving you a 1%, 2%, 3% better likelihood, right? If you can make it to the into the sprint and be top 5 and have your sprint timed right, and then all of these things are going to add up and it's going to save you X. So of course, when a rider has a bad day and they finish 10 minutes off the back, they come in and say like, these new wheels you asked me to ride today were terrible, right? And it's easy to ascribe the sort of the blame or the challenges a rider might face to the thing that's new that they did. And so that's where it can take, quite honestly, years for some of these things to move. Now, on the track, which I just love, the track is so almost purely mathematical, right? The rider does the ride, and you have this time, and you know the distance, and it's quite easy on the track to show somebody, hey, these booties are worth 1/10 of a second in your event, right? And you can do it and you can repeat it. And the power of getting into the rider's head with that is really amazing. I mean, it's back to us telling Cancellara over and over again that like you're on a TT bike and these guys are on 40-year-old equivalents, right? That to me gets really exciting, right? Because it kind of brings the emotional, the psychological, the physical package of the rider together and really just positions them for when it's done right? Because I've totally seen it done wrong, and it can really go sideways on the riders, And I think we've had some of this. I think of swimming is a good example where the suits got tighter and tighter and tighter, and it's faster and faster, and then suddenly they develop this incredibly high percentage of tearing, right? And you have these situations where 5 minutes before an event, the athlete tears their suit, and it's a total panic, right? And you think like you never get that back, right? I mean the thousandth of a second that having the suit that much tighter could have gotten you has been undone by the athlete being in this terrible headspace, right? And so that, I think, for me is sort of like always the tightrope walk that has to be walked, right? We want to, it's Icarus again, right? We want to go as close to the sun as possible, but we cannot melt the wings.
Sure. I guess with just thinking outside the box here, take a chain ring. If you're trying to make that chain ring as light as possible, and could you make a bit of a hollow in the chain ring potentially?
Sure.
There's no reason why.
But you would have to have the basic assumption that weight was important. So what's our weight is probably the most overrated. least important of almost all of our factors. I mean, it's important, but, I would make that argument of, if you're hill climb time trialing, absolutely. If we're track riding, different story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess
right. So
a lot of this is governed by the UCI as well, isn't it? I mean, with the bike weight limits, a lot of the pros are kind of strapping weights under their saddle and stuff to make sure their bike is not too light. So it's a good point. It's not all about weight.
It's a good example, though. I have sort of a long, well-known history with Alberto Contador, not my favorite athlete ever to work with, because he was not a believer in most of this.
Right.
And, he and his mechanic Faustino used to, before key climbing events, they would put aluminum. I mean, he actually had aluminum spindled skewers that he would use. And, they would use the old Benotto sellotape on the bars to save weight. And I used to just stand there with them, kind of pounding my head against the wall going, guys, the bike's going to weigh 6.8 no matter what you do. Like, you're doing 2 hours of work, and I now have to go find another piece of tungsten to stick in the bottom bracket, right? And and it's one of those that for him, that was mentally, emotionally really important. Now, unfortunately, all that action is really disruptive to the rest of the organization of the team, and quite frankly has no technical value, or it has no technical merit, and I used to just really throw my hands up. He was one that would never ride deep section wheels because they made his back hurt, right? Except that you do all the studies. I mean, static and dynamic vibration analyses. With accelerometers under the saddle, we could show that the deep carbon wheels were actually more comfortable than the shallow carbon wheels. The same thing with some of the time trial equipment. And he would always come back in that way and say, like, I know what I feel. I don't try. I know what your data says, but I know what I feel.
Yeah.
And
it's hard to argue. It's hard to argue. If you've got someone that's stubborn and that's set in their ways, you can't win.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think, I fought him for probably 2 years before I think it really, really hit me that, I wasn't going to win the argument, but two, and he is right for him, right? That all the things we want, if he's not going to believe that it works, it becomes sort of a nocebo.
Yes, nocebo.
Right.
Is that a word?
Yeah, that's a word. Yeah,
nocebo.
That's a word. Yeah, nocebo. There's actually lots of interesting, if you Google it, there's fascinating medical stories out there of people who, I think one of the most fascinating ones I can think of is a guy here in the States a few years back in a clinical drug trial for antidepressant. And one of the warnings was, it could cause all these problems and suicidal thoughts and kind of all this stuff. And the guy takes a whole bottle of it and shows up at the hospital completely crashing, having all these symptoms, and they're struggling to figure out what the heck is going on. I mean, they can't find anything wrong with him. And turns out he was on the placebo. So he had taken a bunch of sugar pills and then essentially had mentally crashed his body into all very real physical, the guy's like dying because he thought he should be dying, right? I mean, it's, so nocebo is a very real and,
awesome.
and surprising thing, but it's, so I think, that's our modern take on this is, if you can use the placebo, use it. Don't be the nocebo.
Don't be the nocebo, yeah. Well, there you go, Kev. What do you make of that?
Well, that guy is just super interesting to listen to. I really couldn't get enough of what he was talking about. I was taking notes myself, and what he's learned and what he's putting into practice. I guess that's the key point, is what he's putting into practice in the real world of racing now. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the one thing I took away, kind of once I reflected on it a little bit, was it's all absolutely fascinating stuff. And for the world tour guys and pro cyclists, these type of things come into play. But I guess marginal gains, it's icing on the cake, isn't it? And most people, I guess, should still kind of focus on getting that 80 to 90% right first, or at least as well. I know we speak a lot about not being a substitute for good old-fashioned hard work. So, pumping your tires to the right pressure is, it's going to help you a tiny bit, but ultimately, hard work, riding on tired legs and all that good training, that's what really matters, right?
Yeah, you're definitely right there. We need to get the major things correct first and do those well. and obviously at the highest level. And I guess for anyone that is looking to get the most out of their own performance, these marginal gains are going to make that final difference there. But some of the key points there for me, things like tyre pressure. Like I remember back in the day, riding 19 mil tyres, the more aerodynamic, and they were pump up to 160 psi. We're all doing that, and now we're going 25s and we're going 100 psi. Yeah, I guess the person that first took that risk of riding a race, obviously Roubaix is the good example here of going low tyre pressure. Yeah, to start that whole journey of lowering tyre pressure and testing performance was quite a risk.
Yeah. I guess going back a couple of years, maybe 10, 15 years before CSC, I think was where Josh kind of said this kind of marginal gains concept really started. I guess most teams didn't have the funding to be able to invest in this type of stuff, and it was a case of follow the trend because nobody can prove super hard tyres are slow. But now some more money's come into the sport, more investment, and that kind of Formula One approach to aerodynamics and that is all kind of infiltrating into the beautiful sport of cycling.
Yeah, and actually I remember when someone first rode deep dish carbon wheels in Roubaix, and they were almost laughed at, weren't they? It was unheard of then.
Yeah, and you're thinking, they're going to break. What are they doing on carbon wheels? They're going to snap, but of course they didn't.
Yeah. Now everyone's doing it. It's just the standard now, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, again, that was only half our chat with Josh, and the next half is going to come in the next podcast. So you've got another half hour or so to look forward to. So that's the core topic, marginal gains. Absolutely fascinating, but more to come. Next section then is the Zwift session review. So the session is high intensity recovery, and it's in the 60 to 90 minutes to burn. Now this is pretty interesting session, and I guess it's an example of just getting hard work done. But we're talking 2 18-minute blocks of basically over-unders. So 3 minutes just over your threshold, 3 minutes under your threshold. What would you say is the theory there, Kev?
Well, this is actually a good session. With the 3 minutes on and 3 minutes off, this is like a VO2 aerobic capacity type session. And generally, when we do VO2 efforts, the recovery should be the same as the interval effort as well. So yeah, this is a well-structured session. Yeah, good gains to be made. The main thing is that you can repeat the same power for those 3 minute intervals during the on section.
But yeah, as you said, it's a great example of just getting the hard work done, which alongside some of those marginal gains we spoke about with Josh. Good approach. All right, cycling terminology then, Kev. Have you got a term for me?
Yeah, I do have one here, and I have to admit I'm looking forward to your explanation on this one.
Go on then.
Okay, so we're going to go with 30 seconds, and the terminology is Allez and ho. I hope I've pronounced that right because I'm really not sure myself.
Okay, quality terms. Allez, obviously recognisable term in cycling, means in French it's kind of like go. And Allez and ho combined is the language used in Derny racing. So where the rider communicates to their pacer using Allez and ho. Allez being go faster, ho being slow down. And the reason ho is used, it's just easy. Well, you can say it when you're knackered and out of breath. Imagine trying to shout, "Steady, mate," or "Slow down, knock it back a bit." You can't do it. So ho, bit of a grunt, but you can. You want to go slower. Ho, ho. You can just
okay. That's
get
30
it out.
seconds there, Matt. But I think we need more time on this one. This is all right. So this is for on the track. You're telling me.
Yeah. I think that's where it's invented. Kind of back in the 60s, all that Derny racing. Allez and ho, yeah.
So you're saying you and I are on the track racing as a team. I want you to go faster. I'm going to say Allez.
Yep.
I want you to go slower. I'm going to say ho.
Absolutely, yeah. So you just shout ho as loud as you can, and your pacer should slow down.
Jeez. Okay. You pulled a good one out there anyway.
There we go. I think it's just, I guess, kind of makes sense. I mean, on the road, I've used a different technique with a friend who's quite new to the sport. We have time trials in the UK, 10-mile time trials, and I kind of said, I'm kind of pacing my mate round, and I said to him, right, you shout to me, just shout the number. So from 1 to 10, it's kind of your perceived effort. And if you're shouting 5, I'm thinking, well, I can definitely up this quite a lot. If you're shouting 7 or 8, that's probably where we want to be for the majority of 10 miles. And if you're shouting 9 or 10, I know you're about to get dropped. So it's just another way, I guess, of just gauging your effort. And on that occasion with my mate, I remember you kind of shouting, 7, 8, 8. Next thing you know, she heard nothing. I thought, I haven't heard him shout for a while. Look back, and he's just gone. Obviously, it's kind of getting used to fine-tuning your effort. And turns out what happened, went round a roundabout. He just didn't corner very well, and never got back on. But
forgot 9 and 10.
Forgot 9 and 10, yeah. All right, and quick fire question then, Kev. Pro Team kit, is it for pros only or for fans too?
Definitely for fans.
Yeah, agree. For everyone, why not?
It's something we need to embrace. I think about football teams, soccer teams, whatever you call it, which part of the world you are, selling merchandise and getting your team out there. It's a big part of the sport, and we need to embrace it. I know going back a few years, it was kind of shunned to wear pro team kit, but teams need to embrace it and get their kits out there and spread the goodwill of the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you watch a football match, you might be sat in your house or a local football game in your club kit. Do the same thing with cycling. I don't see any problem with it. Not much more to add, Kev. I think pro kit, embrace, find a team and support your team. That's your way, because with football and other sports, you pay to go and watch it. Well, that's the beautiful thing about cycling. It's all free, right? You can watch it on TV, watch it on the roadside for free. So not only is it a nice little way to support a team, but just embrace it. So I agree.
Definitely.
Q&A section then. First thing to say about the questions. We've got a home for the podcast now. Mentioned it on the last podcast, but mention it again. So on the Zwift forums, there's a podcast section. So that's kind of where we're going to kind of base ourselves. So any questions, comments about anything, if you've got a question that you want us to cover on a future podcast, that's your place to jot your question down. And our 3 questions today have all come from the podcast. So first up, David Lashley. And David's question goes, I'd love to know your thoughts on weight training and supplementation for cycling, and your take on adding power through training versus dropping body weight for performance. I'm an occasional racer, 240 watt FTP, 5'10" and 75 kilos.
Okay, well that's a good question, that one there. It's a bit of a 2-part question there. So we'll look at the weight training aspect first, which we've discussed a bit in detail in previous podcasts. First of all, weight training for cyclists is a good thing, and it should be a year-round thing as well. There is some very good gains to be made by including weight training in your cycling training. But for me, the key point is that the actual training on the bike takes priority, and we also know that you do get a better effect when the weight training is done as the second session for the day. So if you're doing an endurance ride in the morning, it could be 1 or 2 hours or more, and then in the afternoon you would do your gym session as well. Another point to keep in mind is that sometimes athletes make their weight training part of their recovery day. It's best to do your weight training on a really hard, good sprint session out on the road. So do a good, hard, high-intensity session on the road in the morning and do your weight training in the afternoon. That way your legs are really hit hard, they're fatigued. Yeah, there's a good training effect there. And then a recovery day is exactly that. It's for recovery. In terms of going through the phases of weight training, generally we go through building strength early in the season. And then once we get into the racing season, we're looking for power. So you might find that you're lifting the same weight as you were in February during the season in April or May, but you're moving the weight faster. So it means you're more powerful. And there is actually some good devices to measure this now. So we use what they call velocity-based training in the gym now, where you get a small device. It's like an accelerometer that goes on the bar in the gym. So if you're doing squats, you might be lifting 100 kilos in squats, but you find that you're moving it faster. You can actually measure in meters per second how fast you're moving that weight. So you can measure how fast and how much you've improved your power, which is what cycling's all about. So in that question there, David mentioned power, and it's good to mention to measure the power that you're producing in the gym. On to supplementation. This is a really good question, and it's one that unfortunately in the world of social media there's a lot of myths and incorrect information out there. But basically the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, released a document recently, and they have supported 5 supplements that have been proven to enhance performance, and they're safe and legal. And these 5 supplements are caffeine, creatine, nitrate, beta-alanine, and sodium bicarbonate. And they're the 5 supplements that have been studied, tested, and proven to enhance performance in cycling. I can run through quickly how they do enhance performance. So caffeine, it's basically a method of preserving glycogen stores. So the caffeine allows the body to release free fatty acids into the bloodstream. That becomes part of the fuel source, and it preserves your glycogen for later in the race. So caffeine does enhance endurance. Creatine is used for strength, and normally we load over a 5 to 7 day period. You don't take it, we use it what we call in cycles, so you don't take it day in and day out for a season. You use it for 20-day periods, and it actually enhances isometric strength. So for efforts under 30 seconds, creatine is going to improve your performance there. Nitrate, it works by enhancing actually our type 2 muscle fibers, and it also increases the efficiency of mitochondria. And the performance that it actually provides you with is for longer efforts of like between 12 and 40 minute efforts, so those longer type efforts. Beta-alanine, again, it's another interesting one, and it's something that we would use. This one we can consume daily. And the effect that it has, it's on intermittent type efforts. So when you're on the gas, off the gas, between 30 seconds and 10 minutes. So it actually improves your power by, they say, about 3%, and those sort of efforts there. So beta-alanine is a good one to use as well. And sodium bicarbonate, as the name suggests, it buffers lactic acid, allows you to tolerate higher levels of lactate, and it really enhances performance in sprints up to 60 seconds in duration there. So that's a really short conclusion of those 5 supplements. They are worth investigating further. So again, if you're interested in, investing, because these things do cost money. If you are going to invest in some supplements, these 5 are worth investigating further and trying in training first before you use them in racing.
Awesome. Great answer, Kev. Just on the sodium bicarbonate, so saying that's for sprinting, if you're doing road races or criteriums, there's no benefit, right, in taking sodium bicarbonate?
Not in longer events. It really is more for the track riders who are going to be out there, short, sharp efforts. It's going to increase the performance there. So
I remember Danny would always take it for the track and the team pursuit, but never touch it on the road. That kind of makes sense. It's for the short, sharp sprint events.
Yeah. Like really, it's a great question. It really is a topic in itself. So I've really touched on it quite briefly there. But I guess the key point there is that there is, like I said, with social media, there's a lot of misinformation out there and people trying to sell this and that. But these are 5 supplements that have been studied, university level. They've done everything correct. They have proven to enhance performance. They are safe. They are legal. So it's worthwhile investigating the use of these in your own training.
Yep, well, great answer. I'm sure there's me a couple of listeners just want to double check. There's not a 6th item on the list, coffee, cake and all that, Kev? Definitely not on the list, is it?
Coffee and cake. I think that's more for the coaches, the coffee and cake, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll keep it that way. But while you touching about the weight training, just went back and checked out what podcast it was. I think you went into a lot more detail on a previous podcast, and it was episode 23. So if anyone wants more on the weight training, Kev has expanded on that, and it's episode 23. So go find that, and it goes into how important is strength training for different types of cycling and all that good stuff. So plenty more there if you want it on episode 23. Next question, and this is from Rachel. And Rachel's asking, what is the best setup on Zwift for power source? Smart turbo or power meter in terms of accuracy and feel? And Rachel's saying she has the option of both, but she's never sure which to go for. So great question. And I think the best setup makes use of both. And I got this answer from a conversation I had with the Zwift All-Stars captain, Kim Little. And he basically said, no, if you're using a power meter for your power source, your power is applied in-game a bit quicker. So as soon as you increase your effort, there's obviously a small lag between that power being produced by your muscles and then your power source kind of recognizing that increased strain and applying it to Zwift and realizing that increase in avatar speed. But that lag is lowest when you use a power meter versus a turbo. So if you use your turbo, if it's a smart one anyway, for the controllable source, you get the gradient change and the inertia feature. Best of both worlds. So you use your power meter for the power source, use your smart turbo for the controllable source. And as for accuracy, all power meters and devices have a specified accuracy if they're calibrated, which can over or under read. But the key is obviously being consistent. So you want consistent data. So as long as you use the same device, you're going to get consistent data, even if it is reading 1% above or below your actual power. So there you go, Rachel. I think if you have got a smart turbo and a power meter, I think there's an opportunity to utilize both for the ultimate setup. Question 3 is from Sandy Lehman, and Sandy's question reads, how hard should you attack? In real life and on Zwift, I can get a gap, but then find myself gasping for breath and the legs feel real heavy and I get caught and sometimes then get dropped. I feel like I go from being one of the strong guys to being one of the weakest, although all through one attack. Is there a percentage of FTP you should limit yourself to when attacking? What do you reckon, Kev?
Oh, the answer is depends, and this one really is about reading the race. As we spoke about in the Roubaix podcast, it's about sensing how the other riders are feeling, and there is always that point where there's been some really hard attacks, so perhaps people like yourself here have attacked really hard and made the race hard, but people are still fresh early on, so they can follow the attacks. And then you get that lull where you can almost sneak off the front with less effort. So it really is, the answer is depends here, but I think it is more about reading the race more than attacking full gas. Obviously, you don't want to go deep that you can't recover. So you need to read the race, attack within yourself. In terms of, is there a percentage of FTP? That's a hard one to answer. I can't put a figure on that.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't know. What's your thought there, Matt?
Yes, similar. I think in real life, I mean, as you say, it's all about timing, and someone once said to me, attack when you're knackered and attack when it's hard. Because early on in the race, it's so hard to get away. You watch the pros in Roubaix, and they're attacking at the start, and they are attacking full gas. It's like they're sprinting for the finish. You've got to go that hard to get a gap. And same on Zwift. You've got to really commit to your attack when you go, and you have got to give it big beans. I think the higher up the category of racing, or the higher the standard of racing, the more you have to give it to get away. But then, as you say, you can get a gap, but it's sustaining it. So, for a rider who is, if you're a fit rider, you're going to be able to absorb the attack, kind of settle into, around threshold effort to kind of maintain that gap. Whereas a weaker rider won't be able to tolerate that massive anaerobic effort for maybe 30 seconds. That's going to really put them in the red. So, read the race, as you say, Kev. But also you've got to practice it in training, right? You've got to know what type of effort, and it's more feeling it. So I'd never advise attacking and looking down at your power meter. You've got to feel it. You've got to know what you can sustain or what effort you can make, and then what you can sustain. And if you go, if you go beyond that, as Sandy's saying in his question, you get your gap, fantastic. You look behind and you've got 150 meter gap, and your legs are full of lactate, and you're gonna get reeled in pretty quickly.
Yeah, and look, also, let someone else do the work. Follow a few attacks. Be the person on the wheel following the attacks, and that way you can get a sense if the attack is going to stay away. Does it have a chance to stay away? And you can work off that. You can save some energy that way as well.
Yeah, you can tell the sitting sprinter here, can't you? You can tell you coach sprinters.
Let someone else do the work.
Let someone else do the work, yeah. But yeah, it's a good point. And if you're racing with a friend, try attack with them. So take it in turns, because the amount of energy you expend making an attack is probably 3 times maybe what you'd use following an attack. So on that basis, for the same energy, you can follow 3 attacks. You get 3 chances of getting away versus one chance if you're making the attack. So plenty to think about there, Sandy. All right, Kev. Well, I think that wraps up episode 28, and we've got more from Josh on the next podcast on marginal gains. Yeah, I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to the second part of Josh's podcast here. It's very interesting stuff.
All right, take care, Kev, and listen to us soon, guys.
Great work. Thanks, Matt.